last to join today. Dr. Christopher, the floor is yours. Tell me when you want me to move the slides so I can move them ahead for you.
All right. Would I have a chance to move it myself, or?
You should be able to, but it's not set up yet through this platform.
Okay, no worries. Okay. You can probably. Yeah. So, hello everyone. Good afternoon, and this is Professor Christopher Abraham from Jain School of Global Management, a top 100, top 10, and top 20 business school in Forbes, Financial Times, Higher Education. Been in the academic business for the last 24 years and seen different kinds of trends. We are currently at one of the most exciting opportunities in the history of education. And I believe this is going to be a turning point in terms of the history of higher education. And it would completely radically revolutionize the way we look at education, the way we look at it as not just as a means to an end, but not as an end, but as a powerful means to an end. It becomes a catalyst in terms of transforming society, providing the right kind of impetus, the right kind of skills and knowledge for a large group of people. In the way we understand employment, in the way we understand economics, in the way we understand the future of businesses and the future of society in general. So there is a very interesting dichotomy in terms of skills that our current youngsters have versus what would be required in a post-COVID era. Very challenging, but we also believe a great opportunity for creating the right kind of talents, the right kind of skills. And a lot of people today are employed, maybe in the wrong industry, maybe with the wrong skills, or maybe with inadequate skills, or ironically, they may have certain skills but are underemployed in a completely different industry. But next slide, please. So these are very, very different times. And Dr. Abed, yeah, all right. And what is also simultaneously,
Sound, Dr. Christopher.
And that's been escalating. There's a huge talent. Yes?
Okay, I'm sorry. The sound was just interrupted. If you can restart that.
No. So in the last 30 years, there's been a dramatic increase in the cost of higher education. And many of you know some of the sordid details of higher education debt among youngsters, which in the current pace of things might be very difficult to even repay and recover. And ironically, during that same period, quality of education has not really gone up or improved, except for a few exceptions here and there. We've been one of them to be at the cutting edge of higher education, disrupting the pedagogy, disrupting the way we teach, disrupting using technology, disrupting. Now we have shifted the way we look at things. How will business survive? How will businesses thrive? Which businesses will get run down? Which businesses will become opportunities? That's where the challenge is. And the $1 billion question, or even sometimes trillion, would be what is education worth today? So that's a question worth pondering. And the next few moments, between me and Mr. Osman and Dr. Abed, would share some insights in terms of where we see the risk of education, because we see an opportunity to actually reimagine and vis-a-vis education. Next slide, please. So the question education is growth. But the question is the current education relevant to the present condition, which in more practical terms is the COVID era and the post-COVID era, or the future, which again will be manifested by this four-word acronym called VUCA. VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So where is this future leading us? What kind of skills are required? What kind of expectations from employees are there? What kind of requirements are there from employers? What is it that we need to prepare our students for the present and for the future? Because the present, as much as the future, is a VUCA context with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity being part and parcel of. So there is this huge challenge in terms of how do we prepare our youngsters to this challenge? And that brings us to many different kinds of ways of looking at, and the question, do we need the education that we know it? For example, a four-year education, a four-year college degree. What relevance would it have after a child completes 4 years of a higher education degree and then gazes at the work, not clear about what he or she is supposed to be doing? Some of the skills that they learned in year 1 and year 2 may not have any relevance to what they would be doing 4 years hence. So these are in the context of a new emerging generation that has new kinds of skills, that has new kinds of requirements. So I think it's our responsibility to align students with the present and with the future. Can I have the next slide on, please?
This one or next one?
And the future is primarily, no, the next one. Is who we call Gen Z. Now, the Gen Zs are people who are at the cusp of the last century and the threshold of the new century. So anybody between 1990s to 2010, and these people are already there, and many of them are almost knocking at the portals of corporate world. They have different. The question is, are we ready to prepare them? Number two, are we prepared to take them on board into the corporate world manifested by VUCA? Can I have the next slide, please? We call this generation the iGeneration. Mac, iTunes, the iStore. But we believe I stands for a much bigger I, which is intelligence. Intelligence in all its forms, because intelligence itself today has a different connotation. It's no longer intelligence as understood by numerical skills. It's no longer intelligence as understood by communication skills. It is, to use the research of Professor, intelligence. In a world that's increasingly becoming challenging, increasingly become unpredictable, increasingly becoming uncertain. A few weeks back, World Economic Forum came back with a very interesting analysis of 6 critical intelligences for the current COVID era and thereafter. The first one they call contextual intelligence, which is the ability to understand the context, the scenario, the environment on which we operate. The changing scenario in terms of oil futures, the changing scenario in terms of telecom, the changing scenario in terms of different commodities, different products, different services, different industries, so on and so forth. Context is a critical component in order to make sense of what happens around us. And interestingly, it is now identified and defined as an intelligence, which means it can be perfect. The second intelligence is social and emotional intelligence. The intelligence to understand and manage our feelings and understand others' relationships and others' feelings. I mean, that's now a time-tested, proven mechanism to understand how effective a person is, not just by analytical skills, not just by communication skills, but equally important, emotional and social intelligence skills. The third intelligence is what we call moral and ethical intelligence. Today, morality and ethics are no longer a choice. For every person worth their salt who are on board, online, morality is no longer a choice. It's de facto, you're there or you're not there. Authenticity, honesty, truth, transparency, all those which used to be buzzwords earlier are today realities and more important. The fourth iterative in tough and uncertain times, including critical thinking, decision making, creativity, innovation, design thinking, you name it. All those innovative approaches to make the world a better place, to make communities better. And the fifth one is what we call technical intelligence or digital intelligence. The ability to use, adapt, use, and thrive on technology. The fact that we're using Zoho as a meeting platform for this particular webinar is a classic example of technology intelligence or digital intelligence. Increasingly, this will become a more required aspect for every single person in the new era. And last but not the least is transformative intelligence. The ability to take decisions, solve problems, ideas which can metamorphose into big outcomes, transformative intelligence. So when we think of the iGeneration, the intelligent generation would encompass each of these 6 intelligences and make themselves ready for a future that we would like to prepare for them. Next slide, please. So how do we intend doing this? We have to create that new generation with the required new intelligences. One of the best ways is to use appropriate technology, appropriate delivery mechanisms, create a unique culture of acceptance and adaptability and agility, create the right kind of content that appeals to the I generation or the Z generation, and last but most importantly, make them either job creators or job seekers. Who is now not only to be a job seeker, but equally and more excitedly a job provider. Next, please. So these people thrives on authenticity, as we said, the moral and the ethical intelligence, and they thrive on stories. So when we need to reach out to them, the message has to be authentic, the message has to be transparent, the message has to be honest, and the message has to be conveyed in the form of stories. I mean, we know the stories have always been around from the beginning of time. We learned our cultures through stories. We developed our value systems and beliefs through stories. We developed our character through stories. So authenticity and stories make a nation, I and Z generation, to become relevant and to become radical in terms of their approaches. Next slide, please. So look at this additional insight into this new generation. The way they think is very different. We might have different opinions about them, different attitudes about them, but they think radically. They're very different. They're very, I would say, very open, and they're very spontaneous. How do they learn? They learn in very different ways. There were times when we were very worried and concerned when youngsters were using laptops and mobile devices. Today we realize it's become more a norm than an exception. How do they communicate? They have a new language. We probably need to master some insight. Different platforms, Instagram, WhatsApp, Spotify, so on and so forth. And where are they now? They are today, stuck for all the wrong reasons, stuck behind the confines of the four walls at home. But in the entire world is their home. They belong to a borderless generation where they can seamlessly connect with their peers across. And they have certain ways by which they like to be reached. And they have certain ways by which they'd like to get their questions. I think we need to address this in a very fundamental, radically different manner so that this generation understands what it means to be educated and what it means to get or train in the right kind of skills. Next slide, please. Radical idea. What if we could reimagine education from teaching to learning, where the onus of the learning process falls on the student, and where the supervision or the monitoring mechanism of the teacher is virtually taken away, and students are provided a pathway, a guiding light, a mechanism by which they seek to discover through that innate quality of curiosity, asking questions. And in the and in the process of seeking, truth, discovering through an adventure of learning. Day one, when a student comes to class, there's this wise teacher who gives his or her thought process, and the student is beautifully either taking notes or imbibing them into their brains. Now, radically shift that to say the teacher does not teach, but the student learns. He learns through discovery, he learns through experiments, he or she learns through asking questions, he or she learns through curiosity, and he or she goes through a continuous process of exploration and discovery. So it becomes an adventure rather than a teacher-taught classroom. And I think that's what the new iGeneration is looking for. Next slide, please. And if you have to take teachers away, what happens? Would students become chaotic? In fact, they say the greatest ideas, the greatest... Because when there's order, we tend to become laid back. When there is order, we tend to look at things with a process perspective. When there's too much order, we tend to think systems. So what we radically need to do now is to take the conventional mindset of teaching and then look at teachers with a new, redefined role in terms of mentoring, in terms of coaching, in terms of guiding, rather than teaching. And allowing groups a unique opportunity to create a learning environment and a learning process where they learn with each other, learn through each other, and learn by each other's knowledge. Next slide, please. Now, you might want to think, radically rethink. Is that possible? What happens? When we have a revolutionary CEO in Brazil, in South America. His name is Ricardo Semler. And a few years back, Ricardo runs a crazy company, a very successful, multi-billion-dollar crazy company. Crazy because of the way it operates. It doesn't have roles, it doesn't have rules, it doesn't have processes. It just gathers people together. They come back with some very interesting ideas to do a project. Every mechanism becomes a project. Employees have the privilege to set their own targets. They also, believe it or not, have their privilege to set their own salaries. So this was a company that radically reinvented the corporate environment and wanted to do some disruptive doing in the school environment. So they created a Semco school, which pretty much ran on the same lines. No specific curriculum like history, geography, science, English. So they would have chemistry, but chemistry is in the kitchen. So chemistry is in the kitchen is the kitchen becomes the chemistry lab. So when you mix 1 plus 2, when you mix A with B, what happens? Children learn by experimentation, by discovery, and by a voyage of asking questions. They learned pi, which is 22 by 7, as a lot of us know, and it took a lot of time for us to understand and decipher what it meant. So in Semco school, they don't teach pi the way we learned it. They'd give them a bicycle, they'll ask them to design a bicycle. In order to design a bicycle, you need to know how a circle is made. In order to understand a circle, you need the width and the diameter and the radius of the circle. And in order to understand that, you need to understand pi. So the whole learning is in a very fun manner where you do it to outcome deeper than almost every other student in any other part of the world. There's another experiment which happened virtually at the back streets of the US. This was a radical educator who wanted to prove to the world that you don't need a wall to actually have the education that you and I know of. So what they did was they went to the slums of the rural areas, in the city outskirts, picked up kids who never went to school. These kids were brought together, and then together they would go to the city garbage dumps. This is a real story, by the way. They would go to the city garbage dumps, pick up bits and pieces, metals, wheels, stuff like that, and from these picked up materials, which were thrown away into the garbage, these kids were taught. This is called the Maker Revolution. So today there's a radical way of looking at education. There are bits and pieces of this happening. What we want now is for us as people responsible to think that we have to do this in a very, very different manner. Probably even we have to make it crazy for a genuine reason. Next slide, please.
I think this is Mr. Osman Sultan. Finish there. Thank you so much, Dr. Abraham. And I like the terminologies, the chemistries of mixing up things. And this is actually a valid statement in everything we do, whether we're talking about the personal relationships or whatever. And now with that said, let's hear it from the boss of all chemistries, Mr. Osman Sultan. Thank you. Mr. Osman?
Thank you, Dr. Abed. Thank you, Professor Abraham. What I'm proposing is to build on what Professor Abraham started. It's an intellectual methodology, actually. And as you can see, what we will be doing is drawing parallels from what happened in the industrial world, because I think it's fair to say that in the industry, in the corporate space, we have seen disruptions and we have seen new ways that have been reinvented faster than education, faster than the education space. And what probably is happening now is that we are seeing that accelerating. We are very often hearing, we are all actually, I'm sure of that, very often hearing that COVID-19 is the ultimate chief digital officer for any company and for any sector. Because what chief digital officers do in companies, they try to take this transformation, they try to inject this transformation intelligence. And thank you, Professor Abraham, because you gave, you put the highlight on this very important dimension that you have several kinds of intelligence that are in play, and where a good chemistry is needed between all of them. So what the chief digital officer was trying to do, he was doing this in very resistant. I have myself gone with several transformation projects and journeys, and believe me, the number one enemy of that is internal resistance. The funny thing and the paradoxical thing is that customers do not have this, but it's mainly the internal resistance to change something. So we will be doing this parallel. And third, we will be asking questions. Now that might seem as a little bit chaotic. We like things that are structured. And as you can see on the slide that you're seeing, actually chaos is an absolute opportunity for learning. I can tell you that when the internet players started to come with totally, now I don't know if I'm seen on the screen by the audience or not, Dr. Abed, am I on the screen?
No, I cannot see it because I have my online. Could any of the audience tell us on the questions and answers if you can see, Mr. Osman?
Okay, that's not important. I mean, if they're hearing me and seeing the slides. So.
No, they can hear it clearly, yes.
Yes, what happened is when the internet players, starting from the very first one, the search engine, the Google, etc. of this world, the traditional technology corporate space was considering this chaos because it was outside of the established rules, outside of the very established frameworks that existed. Telco, software, hardware, in time, because the telco started first, because they started with models that were totally disruptive. Then the software business started differently when developers came, and even other industries. Let me just give you one example. I hope that will speak to you. It was the iTunes business model that was the most disruptive in the early 2000 to the music industry that was hundreds of years old, maybe, that disrupted. It was not the iPhone or the iPod initially, and then the iPhone, and then the iPad. It was just a different business model. So what's happening now with COVID-19, we entered into a new era, felt as chaos by all of us. If we look at education, we went back to things that might remind us of centuries old, home learning, people not going to schools, not having teachers, people coaching, people having mentors, including people in corporate space, because learning is not only for the students. There was no more textbooks, and most importantly, making people responsible, because a model that was not having the direct supervision. That's not only in the education space, that is as well in the workspace. A lot of companies had to trust employees. Believe me, that's the new model. It's not new, but for them, it was something new, because some companies had, where you have to mark your presence. They had spent technology to ensure that they have the right time management. And here, there was no supervision. And even the important KPI of grading has been totally disrupted. No grading. My son, who is 17 and who was supposed to graduate and go from college and go to university next year, told me, I am not believing it. I was just worried about passing the baccalaureate. He's in the French system, education system. And he said, I'm not. I'm just going to be judged on a continuum of my performance, of my achievements, my results. And he's not, it took him time to get that. So really a profound earthquake in the learning process and the education. Next slide, Dr. Abed. So at this edge of chaos, as it was felt in the beginning, we started to reimagine, and this is what we are doing today, and this is what we will be doing. This is what Professor Abraham started. This is what I'm continuing. This is what Dr. Abed will show you. New models were started to be imagined. Are these going to be a finalized model? Certainly not. Do we have the answers here when we're talking to you? We don't have the final answers. But what we can do is exercise different forms of intelligence. I mean, Professor Abraham was very articulate in mentioning them. It will require different kind of intelligence to try to start imagining what new models can happen. Of course, it will require conceptual intelligence. It will require analytical. It will require technological and digital, what he qualified his fifth, and transformational, because we are really talking about transformation. But as well, we will need to ask ourselves the question of the aim of all that. Education is not a name. Education is a journey for a bigger aim. And we will need to rethink a lot of things. Recently, in a panel, I've heard people saying, but do we need to have 12 years of education, or I don't know how many years of education to consider that we are ready? I had the privilege of interacting a lot with somebody like Joey Ito. He was the head of the MIT Media Lab. And he said very often to me, if you think that you need to send your kid to college and university, and this is a must, don't. They might be very successful without going through this. So we're not here to highlight one truth. I think we are here, and what I want to propose with a lot of humility is to go through an intellectual methodology of asking some questions along that route. Next slide, Dr. Abed. Next slide, please. And, yes. And here, just to quote, it will require to be daring. And we have seen people daring. You have a photo of one of them, not any one of them, one of the most significant. And he himself said, the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. And this is something, as I said, this gentleman, because of a very big ambition, dared to think that I can make people change established things. He totally thought a different model for distribution of music, because this is what people want. As I said, the iTunes business model, not the hardware that he invented. He thought of a different experience in touching the hardware, and this is what people wanted. So every time he took bets that people thought totally unrealistic, he succeeded in this. Next slide, Dr. Abed. Now, one of the main headlines in this world of education, I believe that more and more, and we are seeing this in this period and this crisis that the world is going, this unprecedented crisis, is that we are moving from a culture of the right answer to the culture of the right question. I am part of a generation where we needed to have the right answer. We needed to know what is the answer. Our kids, they don't. Our kids need to ensure, because the answers is somewhere there. Let me say it's with somebody whose name is Google. So it's simple. They know where to get the answer. But as we can see, as I'm sure all of us we see, it's what are the questions we are asked? Are we missing an important question? Are we in our conceptual intelligence looking at the full picture and making sure that we are highlighting the right question so we can find a potential answer, knowing that this answer might change, but doesn't mind. It's not important. The important thing is that we have framed exactly the situation. So whether it's for problem solving, it's defining new ecosystems, whether it is in defining new orders, and here the moral intelligence that Professor Abraham highlighted is really fundamental, because we are more and more talking to a generation, this Generation Z, that we would like to take to the iGeneration, is a generation that has very high quest on morality, on values. So what are the questions that we need to ask ourselves in this intellectual methodological journey? Next slide, Dr. Abed. First, how is this iGeneration different from our generation? Once we try to, and again, I'm saying try to frame that, it gives us the second chapter, the second headline. So if this is the case, how we can help schools address these changes? Let me give you one of the highlights of the first question. I feel now that with a more and more complex world, this next generation, this iGeneration, is not certain about what they want to specialize in, what they want to explore in their learning or in their education process. We all hear around us in social dinners and social gatherings, all these buzzwords that come from technology. Oh, Internet of Things, fundamental. It will disrupt a lot of things. 5G is going to take the world into a totally different dimension. Big data, all this data that is flowing from everywhere. Blockchain, everybody said this is a disruption as big as the internet itself. AI, artificial intelligence, robotics, robot, genomes, etc., etc., etc. Buzzwords all over. If I am today in the shoes of my son who's going to university next year, I would say, but what do I choose? Is there something that is really catching my attention and making me really stick to it? So that's one difference. And the second, how to help schools address this, because let me tell you something. Schools, universities were working by what I call the vertical skills, because companies were recruiting according to this. I need somebody in finance. Okay, there are various finance curricula that there is. I need somebody in engineering in a company. So that was as well. The world was vertically organized, and there was a kind of match, although even this match in recent years and the last decade, and I sit on the boards of several educational platforms. When they, for instance, I had the privilege of sitting on the board of the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Communication in the American University of Dubai. That school was created with the purpose of introducing these changes that exist in an industry that is as well organized by vertical. So of course, you have these verticals. Now, when you go to corporations and you have engineering, finance, HR, IT, technology, whatever, where do you plug something like digital? Where do you plug skills in digital? Where do you plug skills in artificial intelligence? These skills have to be in marketing. These skills have to be in sales. These skills have to be in HR. These skills have to be in finance. All of these. So the transformation of this world from a vertical to horizontal is happening in corporations. It is not happening in universities. It is not happening in school. You need platforms, and I hope that Dr. Abed will take us a little bit. You need platforms that will help students exploring before embarking in a journey, exploring, not necessarily knowing exactly, I will do something related to in finance, to investment and private equity. No, but we need them through a methodology to be able to explore various dimensions and then have a pre-taste of what probably, if they don't, they will be embarking to. So this is how you will help school address these changes. Next slide, Dr. Abed, and I'll wrap it. Okay, so as I said, first question is how can we grab the attention of this iGeneration? I think that anything that can help decluttering or putting in a framework all these buzzwords that exist today, I mean, a map of all these things that are requiring new skills, where they fit, is something that will start by grabbing the attention. Next slide. Once you have their attention, this is a generation of video interfacing. This is a generation of everything on a click. This is a generation on touch. They were born with touch screens where they could, at the age of 1 year old and earlier than that, discover and get back and put the Twinkle Twinkle song that they want. That is not something to be taken lightly. That is to say that their expectation in whatever they do is very high. So whatever you want to do to take them through a journey, an educational journey, has to have the right user experience, the UX, to speak their language, the UI, the user interface, that will lead to the right UX, user experience, in going through this journey. And that is fundamental. Not only you, believe me, you catch their attention, and their attention is quite you know, they try it, they don't like it, they're off. Their span of attention and tolerance is quite narrow. So that is something as well in the education journey, in the education methodology, we need to take into account. Next. Okay, how can we help them to be creative, to be innovative? Now we know traditionally, you know, in courses 101, creativity is driven, can happen through three vectors. One, innovation by necessity. You know, mankind, I used to have to walk 2 hours to get to a point of water, ancient times. Then all of a sudden somebody said, why don't I bring the water to me and use the fluidity of water and they digged, you know, something in the soil. And so the water started to flow and they brought water. They used whether for irrigation or whether for domestic usage, every time. So innovation by necessity. More and more, you have innovation by exploration, sorry, which are a whole ecosystem that is created, taking into account the complexity. And here, let me tell you that this is a very structured methodology. It's not, and as an evidence of that, there is something called the Global Innovation Index that is through a methodology measuring, taking data from every country and giving ranking for every country in the world where they are, what they consider the output indicators and the input indicators. And I mean, so to tell you that this is a very structured methodology. Universities can look at these methodologies, platforms, learning platforms, can look at these methodology and adapt what can be adaptable, because of course it's more comprehensive when it concerns a nation. There are factors that are by the public authorities, etc. But in a university, you can take this method. I think the methodology applies, but has to be in order how you will create this fertile ground that will carry creativity and innovation. And of course, the third driver of innovation, I'm still on the previous slide, just for 1 second, is what is called as innovation by serendipity, which is always, which is almost an accidental outcome that was not done for this purpose, but that people used for a different purpose and then spread and make really a very innovative thing that's disrupted a lot of things. So these are the three things. Now, next slide. Now, what should we do as well? Back to the point I mentioned, and once you grab their attention, if something can help this generation discover who they are and frame, not define, because define is, in my opinion, I mean, we wrote it define, but in my opinion, it's always an evolution. Their ambition will change. Their ambition will be fine-tuned. But we should aim to have them in a journey where little by little they discover. How? They can discover what form of intelligence they have. Because people do not have the same form of intelligence. Usually couples, husband and wives, have different forms of intelligence. Thank God. Because if you and your wife, you have the same type of intelligence, that's a recipe not commendable. So it's good to have this alternates. So discover what kind of intelligence, discover what kind of character. More and more today, you know, when we receive in companies, and I have been receiving in the last 24 years, I've been a CEO, I've been receiving CVs. Very often, a lot of CVs have this common, when they meet the threshold, of course. But the difficulty you have is to figure out, and that you do through interviews, but now there are tools using artificial intelligence to filter that and to try to filter through some through an interview using AI methods, a character. So what kind of character this person from this new generation? Is he a person who likes to work more in isolation and solving some problem, with dealing with technical aspect? Is he a person who likes to open up? To which level? Because today you cannot, even if you are the nerdiest person, you cannot work in isolation. You need to develop certain way of working with peers, with colleagues, with community. So this is fundamental. So that's as well a methodology how we can help this iGeneration. Next slide. And as I said, not only centered on themselves, but how we can help them develop the tools to connect to communities, to businesses. If this COVID-19 showed us something, is that the world is really one connected place. You know, all the governments had to take, because today you can't take measure against COVID-19 if you're still open to the entire independently of others. This is why people and nations shut down around themselves, but now they're figuring out if we want to go back to a normal life, there is a need for coordination because the world is one connected place. Planes, connectivity, people working from everywhere. So you need as well to help this iGeneration developing the tools to connect to their communities, businesses, the world in general. Next slide. And last, in my opinion, is as well how we can help this generation to work in a new form. You know, the world of internet has created, as I said, 25 years ago, started to create disruption in a lot of industries. And I use a headline, we moved from unshared certainties, we moved from the world of unshared certainties, where each industry, each sector, sometimes each company in a sector, they work with their own certainties. And it used to work. It was efficient, but they didn't need to share. We moved from the unshared certainties to the world of the shared uncertainties, to a world where people, because of this everything connected, to a world where you need to interact, you need to sit around the table and find out solutions that are jointly, because you are all concerned. And I can give some examples if in the question session people want. But that's the good news that we all share. The challenging part of that news is we are sharing uncertainties. We are moving from unshared certainties to shared uncertainties. So this is where we need to have our students be prepared, because when they will be in their companies, you know, marketing used to work with their unshared certainties. They didn't need to talk to HR, IT. Sales, they have their own framework. Engineering, IT, HR. This is how companies, the vertical was siloed. Today, we all for anything we do, and how many times in the last decades I've been creating transversal group that bring in a company that bring all these people together. Sit and try to ask the right questions in order to start looking for answers. So one thing we need to do to help this in this learning and new education process is to give tools to prepare students to collaborate in not only structured environment, but unstructured environment. Next, Dr. Abed, please. Okay, and as I said, facing all these buzzwords, how can we have people, but that's not only the education in the sense of universities, colleges. I think everyone, we need an explanation. We need to tell the story about these new technology. So it doesn't come as something that we need to demystify this technology in order to have this generation connected with the future. Connected with the future. So they can be, and here I'm back to the moral dimension of intelligence, they can have the right picture, they can have the complete picture in order to put the right moral safeguards, societal safeguards in these new conversations. The conversations were only what technology can make possible for years. Then when opening to competition happened, the conversation started to be between technology and economy. What technology says possible and what economy says viable. Today, it's missing an important part that is more and more becoming center stage, which is what human and societal is saying desirable. We don't do it because we can, we do it because we need. We do it because it will bring good to people, it will bring good to communities, it will bring good to societies, it will bring good to mankind. That's as well something that the new generation, this generation, is quite keen to bring. This is to the moral dimension and to have this moral intelligence. Next slide, Dr. Abed. Everything we do in liaison with the previous slide to connect them with this future will make them feeling a sentiment of ownership. And we need to do this keeping in mind to avoid divides. You know, when the information highway project came, and let me phrase it this way, I am not young enough in order to not have known this period. I just was in the middle of this in the mid-90s. This is the time where everybody was talking about the digital divide, about having nations, being on a high speed on these highways and nations left on the side. And if I want to make an analogy, the Industrial Revolution left this part of the world, left the Arab world, left many other parts of the world out, because no R&D, no manufacturing really, infrastructure, solid infrastructure, and determined balance of power. In the information age, in the information revolution, after the Industrial Revolution, which now we are living, we need to be absolutely paying attention so no nations are left out. There are not the people who are owning this future with all these buzzwords that are. And one way of doing this is what I said in the previous slide, is preparing our iGeneration in this part of the world to be connected with this future by helping them to understand, by making it relevant to not only students, to businesses, to corporations, to government, to nations, making the future for me as an individual, as a student, as an employee in a company, and or as a decision maker, policy maker, making this future mine. Next slide.
That I think will bring it over with,
To yourself.
what you've done. Thank you so much, Mr. Osman. And I remember I was a generation that started with slider calculators. If you remember about those back in the 60s. Then we came up into the calculators. Then we became up into the Fortran language programming in the 80s. Now all of this stuff is in a museum somewhere. It is no longer available today. So if we want to think ahead, think in terms of what IBM CEO said in 1945, that they were looking to the day that they were producing 3 supercomputers a year. Now IBM is out of computers into something else, while others are capturing the markets with their computers. This is transformation. For the leadership that seen the differences, and when they are ready to move, they were moving ahead. Now, let me start with my conceptual presentation that frames everything that Dr. Christopher stated earlier, and Mr. Osman brought it into context to how we're going to bring this context out into the framework and a model that is workable. But let me start with sayings first. What is critical to educators today is to look for the right strategic questions to ask. Questions that are relevant to their institutions, teams, students, the market, and the communities they serve, all their stakeholders, and build the relevant strategy for their institutions. This is what is key, has to be done and looked at early stages or in the times that we need to transform. Now, what we need to do also is designing e-learning model for iGeneration. We had to look at the at them differently in many ways, like Mr. Osman was talking about. They have different habits. When to start their day, when to sleep, when what. Now, what we needed to do is they like a type of questions and answers, like text messaging, SMS. They like that. They love it. They can stay all night working games on it, and things that are really different. Things may appear to us adults as strange, crazy. But that's how all good things started. Crazy, strange. Flying, remember? The man wants to fly one day. So that's a mentality of iGeneration. They like to think different than we are. And if we see one like that, support them. Don't discourage them. If they think different than the crowd, support them, because the next crowd will be them. This is historically what has been happening throughout our lifetime. Now also, we also focused in designing our models on how to make e-learning relevant to iGeneration, regardless of place and time. Because they don't like to be limited to a space. They don't like to be limited to a time, to a set hours, but it has to be relevant in reality, what it means to me. What is it that I can do? What is it that is going to be exciting for me to build for others to enjoy? How to create those relevant initiatives for me as a generation, for others to start appreciating what I am. Now, what we have done is we started thinking in terms of the experience each and every single student developed for themselves. Now remember, current education system is based on copy and paste. You have to remember everything the instructor knows. You have to do the thing, the way the things the instructor does. And if you do it differently, you fail. Now, what we wanted to do is we had to think the different experiences each and every one of them do and focus on how to make the experience relevant to them first, to stay excited, to stay entertained, to stay in a productive mode around the clock, beyond our expectations. With that being said, in 2004, we developed our first university system in the world. It was actually the first that came outside of the United States. We took a bold move to start our first project in e-learning to transform the way things are. We were very excited to think that early on, in 2004, that we were bringing to the Arab world and beyond a game changer in education, and yet new transformational learning system. Exciting. And to develop it, we had to focus on strategic objectives, what we were aiming to do. What is education? To create a meaning, a definition for education. Our strategy was to deliver an engine that would accelerate education journey towards 2020, where we are today. Actually, these were the words of Dr. Khalid Touqan, former Minister of Higher Education back then, who patroned a conference on this system back in 2005. I would like to read aloud that what we aimed to develop at that point, to resonate aloud deeply and think about it. Some of these items: create relevant learning system that can sustain the improvement of education deliverables quantitatively and qualitatively. Reduce the cost of education to become affordable to all classes of people. Foster relevant research and developments to create an impact on people, communities, and business to thrive. Promote local opportunities globally. Develop a new resource of revenues by creating a sustainable relationship between business and education to foster present and future economic and business opportunities. Isn't that what we are aiming to do today? Isn't that what everybody is talking about developing today? Now, what we did back then is we put together a very strong support system to start a project called Arab American e-University System. We had a lot of research papers published around it. We had a lot of conferences that were done about it, workshops, training, to bring academia and business world together to support the students' journey to develop their own communities, rurally and in the urban big cities. The model we created was unprecedented, and we worked very hard for it to thrive. Unfortunately, we failed back then. Remember, I like the statement Mr. Osman said, the biggest challenge is from the inside, not from the outside. We failed for factors that we overlooked. We never thought it would be for reasons that were purely cultural and policy systematic. Educators back then, and still a lot of them to this day, did not want to change the way they think. And education institutions did not see a reason to change while the demand for education remains high, and people were and still willing to maintain paying the rising cost of education despite the deteriorating quality of education. And the other policy problems was no accreditation criteria was in place to support e-learning back then in the Arab world or the rest of the world, except in the United States. And a lot of countries today that are trying to implement e-learning or distant education, they still don't have accreditation. And that's going to be a major struggle for later, when other universities try to recognize a degree that our students will carry, and they can't qualify it. Now, the other problem, luckily, I like to thank COVID-19. In 2020, COVID-19 has moved everything so fast for education that they are now racing to catch up to the speed of change. COVID-19 has changed the conditions to accelerate e-learning, not distant education. Strange, right? The reason why I'm saying that, because distant education actually rushed most education institutions rushed into distant education totally unprepared because they have to do it. They had to do it with the conditions that were created. Now they are exposed. Parents are now seeing what their kids are studying and saying to themselves. This is what I have been paying for my children. This is what my children have actually been studying at schools. COVID-19 through distant education brought this wide into the open. And educators in a lot of schools, in a lot of countries, didn't see that happen. And they're still struggling, trying to convince themselves, I'm doing such a great job, but that they are not seeing the signals coming out. And the wrong signals are being transmitted to promote distance education that is firing back. We should focus on why we need education with the answers provided through distant education and e-learning. For example, why do I need an education today? If a student that coming into education in 2018 or today are able to acquire information faster than the instructor, are able to analyze that information faster than the whole department, are able to acquire more current, more updated information than the whole library of a university. Why do they need education? This is a fundamental question as a decision makers and policy makers we really need to take to understand what is the role of education today that we have to undertake. Before I forget, please, if you have any questions during the duration of this presentation on what Dr. Christopher and Mr. Osman discussed earlier, please put it in the questions and answers. I'll be more happy to ask them for you. Now, if we cannot introduce game-changing learning, then what are we doing? This is a key critical question for educators. What is it that you're doing today to change conditions since schools went back home, like Mr. Osman said? We are back to almost what it was 100 years ago. No instructors, no books, no control, no supervision. You're on your own. What is it that we are doing to change that? Now, change is inevitable, and we cannot ignore the fact that we have to act and act fast before it is too late. The question remains for most education institutions, how do we do this? Because what happened with COVID-19, it's crushing prices down. It's going to be forcing a lot of schools to merge. It's going to be forcing a lot of institutions to look beyond their normal way of thinking and running business. Education is changing tremendously. Now, what we are doing now, at Identity Branding Forum and the board, we are re-implementing what the strategic objectives we started with in 2004 to help institutions find how. We went back to our original drawing board and made some improvement and added a new strategic objectives. These are the key new ones that we have added to our list. The critical changes we made were very strategic, value to students and stakeholders. Now, this is what I would like to focus on: how to build a system that thinks ahead of its time to connect to the newborn. How to build a system that allows the students to discover early on what they want to be and then choose the relevant education for them. Defining their learning journey. How we could propagate the data of the discovered opportunities to education institutions and business. How we could get students connected and engaged with the past, present, and future. The past, parents and grandparents. Present, business, the future, newborns. How do we connect them to that journey? In our design for the platform, we emphasized we had to look at things differently. We wanted students to constantly be able to discover what would be the right thing to do next, and then support them doing it throughout their lifetime. Creating for them an ongoing journey to stay sustainable and make the world around them sustainable. The world that is connected with them, to them, sustainable. The world engaged with them is sustainable. These are some of the things that we have done emphatically to help develop, to help students develop talents early on. We designed talents of endearment to reverse the process of education. Today's education teaches the students first, and then once they graduate, they start discovering what they want to do. With talents of endearment, which Mr. Osman Sultan is the chairman of its board of trustees, things different. It will get the students to discover first what they are, what they want to be, the talents that they have, and then choose the relevant education. Think how meaningful that to them and to education institutions. We help the students discover their talents and decide later what is the education to pursue. With a lifetime online community support to sustain their learning journey. To help them stay connected and engaged to build, we created iPen Club to provide them clusters of communities for them to thrive through. Now, we also have developed sustainable human development protocol to help students develop their sustainability landscape. Please visit the website links that you're showing on your screen to discover a little bit more in terms of how all of this is going to come together. So this is a big transformation in learning and education, helping students discover what they want to do and not what they have to do. And then let them discover on their own how to do it without supervision and without restricting resources. Transforming teachers to mentors and coaches. This is the future for teachers. Who doesn't want to change, they're going to be on retirement. Remember, it's intrinsic, not it's intrinsic, not extrinsic, and this is what it's meant to be right now. The object is the build and sell. The subject is the human opportunities that you build subjects for. Focus on making people feel great about themselves, not just feeling good about what you provide them. The more you are focused on helping people to grow, the stronger your relationship with your market will be. Focus on the human subject opportunities and then choose or build the suitable objects for it. This is how we move students, move the education system, move the whole process from extrinsic motivation, having to do something because you have to intrinsic motivation for doing something because you love to do it, because this is how you want to do it. To make people feel great about themselves, I'm sorry. Okay, to make people, I moved ahead of myself here. To make people feel great about themselves, you need to think of the value you can afford them. Oh, let me step back here a little bit. I want to talk about it here. We are focused in terms of artificial intelligence. How do we prepare the younger generation to artificial intelligence? The question isn't how to prepare them for artificial intelligence. The question is how to prepare artificial intelligence for them. They have to decide their own opportunities that is relevant to them and to the environment they are at. So we need to stop dictating to them what to choose. They have to make a decision what to choose. And then we help them build it. Now, to make people feel great about themselves, you need to think the value you can offer them. We help students create a purpose, make it, for example, how to make people happy, and the value in how they are going to do it. This is a critical process that we go through. Then, I'm sorry. Then we help them think how to align all their stakeholders with with same purpose and collaborate to deliver it. We are helping them to move from doing what they have to do what they love to do. Whether in education, business, or even at home, they will be focusing on inner drives, not outer drives. Now, this shift requires a new talents, a new training, and this video is a powerful message to show what we can do with the students.
Listen,
It's gonna work.
you can only be stopped by a master of cheat.
Oh, you sound just like Sheikah with the cheat this, cheat that, cheat. I'm not a master of cheat, okay? I don't know if I'm the dragon warrior. I don't even know if I'm a panda. I don't know who I am. You're right. There's no way I can stop him in his army. Unless you had an army of your own. You? Not just me.
Us.
All of us. I finally found my son after all these years. It's gonna take a lot more than the end of the world to keep us apart. But you don't even know Kung Fu. Then you will teach us. What? I can't teach you Kung Fu. I couldn't even teach Tigress. And she already knows Kung Fu. Oh, I know I'm the last guy you want to trust right now. But you gotta believe me. We can do this. We can learn Kung Fu. We can be just like you. What did you just say? We can do this? No. We can learn Kung Fu? After that? We can be just like you? Yes! We can? No! You can't! But you don't have to be. That's what Shifu meant. I don't have to turn you into me. I have to turn you into you.
That doesn't make any sense.
I know!
Close enough.
It's gonna work.
This is the challenge that we are going through today in the world. So what we are doing in Talents of Endearment is training students to be themselves, not to be copy of us as teachers or educators, or someone in an office space that says, I want so many copies of this. We're not creating copies, we're creating originals. So Talents of Endearment aims to create a transformation in learning for students' journey. We call it a game changer for students and education, as we have a very influential board of trustees behind it, and headed by Mr. Osman Sultan in this journey. Please visit the website for Talents of Endearment to discover a little bit more in terms of what we do with it. Now, this is a diagram that shows how far we are going and how this systems will flow all the way from high school, schools, ninth graders, where we're focused on building up their social talents for students participating in our Talents of Endearment. We have that version for them. And then there are a few of them that will go to vocational training for skilled talents. So we move from social talents to skilled talents, or we move through college to creative talents. All of this relevant to our creating an innovative workforce that would either go to entrepreneurships or to become an employers to serve society, to serve business. So we thought that Talents of Endearment will create a flow chart for every business, for every school, for every government, for every decision maker, of how do I really connect with that generation that is going to be the future leader. How can I create with the current talents or future talents to be connected to the future? This is Talents of Endearment and what it aims to develop throughout its process for students. And what we also do is, through Talents of Endearment, we help students learn how to build clusters of support, to build communities to thrive, to share their why through it. This is a critical process of what Talents of Endearment will help the students discover. What we also help the students to discover, those clusters, is key. Why? Because we have focused on building clusters of business and education institutions for students to connect with and engage building. Through the clusters, they will share relevant data. They will share a future. Think of all the sharing these clusters will be providing, and the value and the impact the students will be on the students, education institutions, schools, business, government decision makers, policy makers, the whole, the communities, people. This is critical focus in terms of how, when we thought of building talents of endearment and the platform to support it. Through our e-learning model, we have the methodologies and the delivery, which is the e-learning model, how to deliver it. We are focused on building a global community of communities and clusters within those communities to support business and people through education and the sustainable learning journey of students. Take a picture of this and envision what it will look like. What we have done is we thought about e-learning remove barriers to start a journey to resonate at 360 degrees across. Now, this is what our platform looks like so far. Allow me now to start to share what this would look like. Now, the students will go through, I'm sorry. Can you all see my screen? They get this the setup where they can start setting up to get into their community or to log in. But to make it relevant, we developed communities of communities that looks like this. We have a different training. We have our university partners who have their own communities in India. We have also the memberships of the business memberships of IPEN Club, the different levels for businesses, decision makers, college students, students from 11 to 18 years old, professionals, entrepreneurs, all brought in together, universities in Jordan, businesses in different countries, in UAE, public forums, public dialogues, where they start a journey. This is what we are starting on June the 18th, actually, for 100 students from around the world through our partners institutions, where they will participate in this learning journey, a model where they will share their experiences, their ideas, and foster everything that we have been talking about through this 1-hour webinar, everything that they will run it through the different modules, the different experiences, different sessions, the different discussions, the different posts, the different forums. They will start setting up for themselves and having their own discussions, breakout groups, different projects, and how we are not only connecting them together throughout this group, but connecting them together with the outside of this group throughout all the universities, the structures, businesses, members within this structure. This is in brief what the platform is contemplated to do, and it's going to continue to grow with the number of communities of partners that we are building up with government agencies later, institutions, schools, technology partners, all are working together to make this happen. Let me get back again into my screen. So I hope you can see this all together. So basically what we have done is created a world of worlds for students to foster and be a part of and bring it together through them. This is the value we're trying to get the world to focus on these children, on these generations. Now for the partner schools, we created an incentives for them. They will be sharing a platform. They will be sharing classes. They will be sharing instructors. They will be sharing communities. They will be sharing data, most valuable asset of today's world. They will be sharing opportunities, and they will be sharing a future. Imagine this being shared with businesses, how we are transforming business and education tomorrow through this platform. What we have done, we developed our own services for e-learning to enhance our platform for institutions through faculty's training, design of ecosystems for institutions, even for businesses and governments, how that will be based on how all of this will be bridged through generations, all the way from ninth graders or younger, all the way to people in schools, college, and even out in the world with the programs provided by Talents of Endearment to businesses and entrepreneurs as well. And now, for the propositions to be greater, we bundled our state-of-the-art e-learning method platform with e-learning for Talents of Endearment for partner institutions to make this better. Why this is important? Because today everybody is struggling to where do we start? How do we do it? We did our best to put it the way we have done today. And on June the 18th, we're gonna start running this journey with our first classes with 100 students from institutions from France, from UAE, from India, from Tunisia, from Jordan, from Egypt, all to come out to tell the world, this is what we need. This is the moment we have been waiting for. This is the opportunity that nobody has offered this before. But together we are doing it, and we are doing it through you, with you. Thank you for listening. And please share with us any questions.